Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. In reading, the nation's students are still stuck in a pandemic slump. When it comes to reading, the nation's 3rd through 8th graders are still mired in a pandemic era slump. According to new testing data in math, the news is only a little more disheartening. Student achievement in those grades either held steady or improved slightly. Though all grades remain behind performance levels of same grade students in 2019. The data comes from NWEA, a K-12 testing and research organization, and its Spring 2025 MAP Growth Assessment. A suite of tests taken by millions of students in thousands of U.S. schools. Math is crawling back, however modestly, but reading isn't budgeting, says Karen Lewis, Vice President of Research at NUE. I know people want this chapter to be over, but this data reminds us it isn't. Looking away won't make the problem disappear. It means accepting these outcomes are permanent. That is not an option. NUE is also unveiling a new tool that will be publicly available. A performance dashboard meant to help student leaders and policymakers understand how their students are faring compared to a broad, representative sample of the country. Reading scores remain stuck. There's little good news in the spring 2025 reading scores. They might show slight gain across This stagnation is consistent regardless of race, ethnicity, or school poverty level, NUE said in a press release. Math scores rebound slightly. There's a little more room for optimism in the spring 2025 math achievement data. Students in several grades made slight gains compared to the same age groups in 2024. Most grades have also shown slow but steady improvement since 2021. One more positive: the improvement in math achievement has come across student groups, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Unfortunately, in spring 2025, no grades were performing in math at the level seen in 2019 before the pandemic. NUE's takeaway mirror similarly worrying patterns highlighted by federal data, released earlier this year as part of what's known as the nation's report card. A new performance dashboard, NUE has also released a new public-facing dashboard for schools and politicians to gauge where their local students are performing relative to the rest of the country. The dashboard will be updated with new data 3 times a year, far more often than comparable data from the nation's report card, which only comes out every 2 years. Tom Kane of Harvard University Center for Education and Policy Research likens these rounds of student achievement data to helpful health checks to see how students are doing. 2 years is too long for American students to go between doctor visits. especially when recovering from a major injury, such as occurred during the pandemic. Kane says, calling the data available through this new dashboard an essential complement to the nation's report card for tracking students' recovery. Megan Kuffeld, Director of Growth Modeling and Data Analytics at NOI, says given the unevenness of recovery within schools and classrooms, national trends like these are an important first step to understanding where to dig deeper at the local level and ask critical questions about the necessary support and resources. The move to get districts and states more data to help inform their decision making, including on whether and how to spend scarce school dollars on academic interventions, comes as the Trump administration has gutted the Institute of Education Sciences, the division within the U.S. Department of Education that collects, analyzes, and publishes federal student achievement data. Legal experts say Kristi Noem's airport video breaks the law. Penalties are unlikely. Several airports across the country are refusing to play a video from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem at security checkpoints, saying its political message violates their policies or is illegal. In the video, Noem blames Democrats for the ongoing government shutdown. Noem says in the video posted on social media by the White House, "It is TSA's top priority to make sure that you have the most pleasant and efficient airport experience as possible while we keep you safe." She continues, "However, Democrats in Congress refuse to fund the federal government, and because of this, many of our operations are impacted, and most of our TSA employees are working without pay." Scholars of government law and ethics say this political message violates a law called the Hatch Act that restricts executive branch employees from engaging in certain political activities. But Noem is unlikely to face consequences for doing so. Here's what to know about the video and the history of enforcement, or lack thereof, of the hatch. Multiple airports say the video violates their policies. The airports told NPR they are declining the request from the Department of Homeland Security because the messaging violates local policies and state laws. The Chicago Department of Aviation, which operates O'Hare and Midway airports, told NPR that the Noem video violates its advertising policies about endorsing or opposing any political party. These guidelines help ensure the airports remain welcoming and neutral spaces for all travelers, the CDA said in a statement. A spokesperson for the Port of Seattle, which oversees the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, said The Port of Seattle will not play the video on its screens at Sea Airport due to the political nature of the content. We continue to urge bipartisan efforts to end the government shutdown and are working to find ways to support federal employees working without pay at sea during the shutdown. Stanley Brand, a professor at Penn State Dickinson Law, where he teaches criminal law and government ethics, said many airports receive federal money, which can come with prohibitions on how to use that money, including a ban on using it to influence politics. By refusing to play the video, most airports are likely trying to act self-protectively. They just don't want to threaten their funding, Brand said. Some airports pointed to federal law as well. In Oregon, Port of Portland spokesperson Molly Prescott said in an email, "We did not consent to playing the video in its current form, as we believe the hatch clearly prohibits use of public assets for political purposes and messaging." Why does this violate federal law? Brand agrees that the video violates the Hatch Act, a 1939 law barring federal employees in the executive branch, except the president and vice president, from participating in most types of political activity on government time or from using the government's resources. It prevents officials from using their authority to influence or affect the results of an election, or using resources or media that advocates for or against a partisan political party. And that's essentially what's on the no message in the airports, said Brand. This seems like a blatant use of political messaging in a forum and by somebody who probably shouldn't be doing it, he said of the video. Under the Hatch Act, it's also illegal to use government resources to benefit or harm any political party. Kathleen Clark, a law professor at Washington University, told of Law in St. Louis, says that what is happening with the Gnome video, which Clark said is directed at imposing a political cost on Democrats for the government shutdown. Since the government shutdown, Trump administration has placed political messaging on the websites of federal agencies. And in some automated email responses blaming Democrats for the impasse. Other ethic experts and federal employees have raised alarms over this kind of communication, saying it also violates the Hatch Act. Intentionally and openly to defy the statute and regulations to demonstrate that Trump administration is above the law. In an emailed statement, DHS didn't address NPR's question about whether the video violates the Hatch Act, but Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin echoed Noem's statement from the video, adding, "It's unfortunate for our workforce has been put in this position due to political gamesmanship. Our hope is that Democrats will soon recognize the importance of opening the government." What are the consequences of violating the Hatch Act? The U.S. Office of Special Counsel, an independent federal agency, is responsible for enforcing the Hatch Act, and it looks into complaints filed against government officials. But that office is closed right now because of the government shutdown. There have been a number of cases where people from multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican, have been sanctioned for violating the Hatch Act, Brand said. During the Biden administration, then White House Press Secretary Karen Jean-Pierre was found to have violated the Hatch Act after repeatedly using the term MAGA Republicans days before the 2022 election. She had made those comments during a White House briefing. The OSC decided against disciplinary action and issued Jean-Pierre a warning letter. And during the first Trump administration, former White House advisor Kellyanne Conway was cited for Hatch Act violations, and the OSC recommended she be removed from federal service. She remained in the job. Some penalties have been imposed on less prominent government employees. In 2012, a Social Security Administration tech specialist was suspended for 6 months after he recruited precinct captains and handed out yard signs for a gubernatorial candidate from his office. He also hosted a fundraiser for another candidate. A General Services Administration employee was suspended without pay for campaigning for Barack Obama's presidential run in 2007. According to a report from the Politico, she invited 23 people to an Obama campaign fundraiser while on the job and used her government email to send campaign-related emails. Discipline for the violators of the Hatch Act is paltry, Brand said. There are no criminal penalties. The sanctions are mild in comparison to most other regulatory statutes affecting the government service. He explained, "You can be reprimanded, you could be removed, and you could suffer a reduction of pay. You could be given a civil penalty of $1,000. And even still," he said, "those available punishments are not very strenuously enforced." With new cuts at CDC, some fear there's nobody to answer the phone. Around 600 workers at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were cut over the long weekend, and as part of a wider push by the Trump administration to slash the size of the federal workforce during the government shutdown. It was not a smooth process. On Friday, more than 1,300 CDC employees were notified that they had lost their jobs. Many of them were furloughed because of the shutdown, and found out only after Russell Vought, director of the Office of Management and Budget, posted on X that the RIFs have begun. The next day, around 700 employees got emails revoking these reduction in force notices, according to numbers compiled by the National Public Health Coalition, a group of former CDC employees. Erin Melton Backus, a health communication specialist with the CDC's Office on Smoking and Health, who has been on administrative leave for months, was one of them. It was the third time this year she's received a termination notice. We have no idea why certain programs were eliminated and others were saved, Baca said in a joint press conference held Tuesday by NPHC. At this point, it seems like the chaos and lack of transparency is the point. In a Tuesday court filing, the Department of Health and Human Services attributed some of the firings and rapid rescindment to data discrepancies and processing errors. When the dust settled, around 600 CDC staffers were cut over the weekend, according to the former CDC employee group and AFGE Local 2883, a union that represents CDC workers. Those fired include CDC staff who brief Congress, those working on health statistics and chronic disease. It also affected CDC support staff, such as those at the CDC library who provided mental health support after an attack at the CDC's main campus in August, and human resources staff who were called back from furlough to lay off colleagues and members of their own team. HHS declined to confirm numbers or groups affected by this round of layoffs, but Andrew Nixon, Director of Communications, said staffers that were terminated were designated non-essential. The court filings state that on October 10th, a total of 982 employees were purposefully cut from HHS, which includes agencies such as the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, in addition to CDC. The National Federal Workers Union is contesting the legality of these and other layoffs. These illegal firings for our union members during a federal government shutdown is a callous attack on hardworking Americans and putting the livelihoods, health, and safety of our members and communities at great risk, said Yolanda Jacobs, a health communication specialist at CDC and president of AFGE Local 2883, speaking at a union press conference on Tuesday. The recent round of cuts add to the stream of workers leaving the CDC this year due to earlier rounds of firings. Early retirements, resignations, the CDC has lost around 3,000 employees, or a quarter of its staff, since January, according to the union. The entire staff of the CDC's Washington office was eliminated in the recent cuts, upending a long-standing support system for congressional representatives. CDC has worked directly with Congress for decades to help constituents by providing data, expertise, and insight when needed, said Dr. John Brooks, who retired last year as Chief Medical Officer for the CDC's Division of HIV Prevention at the NPHC press conference. These firings mean Congress no longer has a means of direct access to the agency. It funds when it needs information or briefings. Outside of the Washington office, CDC policy experts that help develop briefings and answer questions from Congress have also been eliminated, according to NPHC. Overall, the cuts to CDC staff and budget under the Trump administration undermine the nation's public health infrastructure. Brooks says, many experts, including myself, are concerned that we are no longer well prepared for the next big outbreak or disaster because of the Trump administration's continued erosion of our nation's ability to respond to public health emergencies. State and local health departments are feeling the effects. When faced with problems such as outbreaks or food poisonings or hospital infections, they've traditionally reached out to the CDC for help. Sometimes that help might be, we're going to send some people to help you investigate this. Sometimes that might be talking to somebody who's the world's expert on a specific type of infection or exposure, said Dr. Karen Remley, a former CDC official and former health commissioner for Virginia. At the NPHC press conference, now there's nobody to answer the phone. In an email, Nixon of HHS described the federal health infrastructure as a bloated bureaucracy and said HHS continues to close wasteful and duplicative entities to streamline the agency for the American people.